player.
The sound of where we live.
Of where we live. Daytimes with Ian Skye. BBC Radio Derby.
Steve Jordan's with you from 2 this afternoon on Radio Derby. Before that, I got Sean Wallace, the chaser from The Chase, coming on after 1. But it's that hour of the programme, lunchtime. Kick your feet back, get yourself something to eat if you can, and enjoy a bit of extended conversation. Lunch with the comedian Dave Chawner today. Dave, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon to you, Ian. How you doing?
Yeah, really good. Lovely to get you on. You might well recognise Dave. You might have seen him on TV and all sorts of places you've popped up over the years. But you grew up in Burton.
I did, Burton-on-Trent, Burton lad. So I know the smell of Marmite and yeast very well.
The smell of home. It's one of those towns, isn't it? Eh?
Yeah, it very much is. And it's weird. Like when you move away, I genuinely do miss it.
Yeah. How long have you missed it for when you get back?
When I get back, I'd say it's sub 20 minutes. But when I'm away, you can, paste over all of the memories.
So actually born in Barton, I think. But yeah. And went to John Taylor. What was the best thing about being a young lad in Burton?
Oh, it's brilliant. It's a brilliant town. And John Taylor is an amazing school. The teachers are absolutely brilliant. I still speak to Miss Cocaine and Mr. Bailey and Mr. Evans that all taught me. And it's just a beautiful part of the country. And especially when I was growing up, you still had a lot of the little brewery pubs. So we used to go in there when we were, I don't want to say underage. Absolutely not when we were underage. Definitely when we were of age. But it's just such a lovely place, and I really I come back quite regularly, but I think it's somewhere that you always will have a really special place in my heart.
And who was there when you were growing up? Is there 4 of you, right?
Yeah, so it was my mom, my dad, my sister, and our incredibly obese cat, Smudge.
Who was responsible for the cat putting on too much weight?
Oh, well, I mean, it's ironic based on what we're going to go talk about later, but I think it was my mom and dad. They used to feed her 2 punnets of prawns every single day. I mean, that cat was fed better than me.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I latch onto that and think, that's interesting when we talk about eating and stuff. And of course, without even clocking, that's a thorny one that we're going to talk about. Because when in life did you develop some difficulties in your relationship with food, do you think?
I think it was probably when I was 16, 17. And I think you're absolutely right to use the word develop, because I think with a lot of mental health diagnoses, they creep up on you. It's kind of like, if you've got bad eyesight, it takes a couple of things to happen for you to realize, wait a sec, that's a little bit fuzzy. I can't read that. And I think it's exactly the same with your brain, because you don't really get any perspective or distance on it. It creeps up on you, and it took me a good few years to realize that I had got a problem with eating.
I think an awful lot of us probably have an unhealthiness in aspects of the way that we relate to food beyond what it just should be, which is fuel, but it's when it gets the better of you, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. And that's a difficult thing, isn't it? Food can be amazing. It can be brilliant. It can be fun to make. It can be fun to get people around. But I think when I was 16, 17, if I'm entirely honest, I actually genuinely loved being in Barton, loved being at John Taylor. And that was the kind of weird catalyst for it, because I had this incredible life, had these incredible friends, incredible family, and this girl that I just started dating. And it was like, oh my goodness, this is incredible. But that all had a bit of a time deadline, a sell-by date for when I was moving away to university. And I think a lot of people over the last 18 months, a lot of stuff is out of your control. And for me, when it felt a little bit out of control, it felt a little bit too big for me, I focused on the things that I could manage, and that just happened to be food. So I restricted more and more over time because I couldn't get a handle of any other area of my life.
So when you actually got a diagnosis of anorexia in your life, I mean, where were you at in your life at that point? I know it's the same year that you sort of jacked in your jobs and went full-time as a stand-up, so it's quite a monumental year.
Yeah, I mean, we're whizzing forward like sort of a good 7 or 8 years then until I was sort of 23. And that was, things had sort of slowly spiraled down further and further. And I remember, weirdly, I got diagnosed on the 22nd of December, 2013, so just before Christmas, and I was told you're severely clinically anorexic. And then I had to go home, and there's the festivity of food. So it was all weird. But yeah, it took me a good long time to actually go forward and be diagnosed.
Did you, I mean, as you say, we whizzed forward from talking about how you might have developed an unhealthy relationship to being diagnosed anorexic in 2013 at 23. What was the journey? I mean, there must have been points at which people said to you, you've got a problem. You said to yourself, this ain't right.
Well, you know what? I think that's actually a really good point, because people started telling me that I was anorexic. People have to say, you are anorexic, you have this. And I was like, absolutely no. No, that's for, people who weigh less than a bag of crisps, or like, have a thorax that looks like a toast rack. That's not me. I was just cracking on with my life. And then when I went away to university, I kind of realized I actually had this job over the summer. It was very odd, but I was teaching English as a foreign language to kids from all around the world that came over the summer holidays to bits and places in the UK. And it was a boarding school. And I remember very distinctly that you ate 3 times a day. You couldn't prepare your food. You had no calorie count, no healthy option. It was pizza, pasta, chips. That was it. And I remember how much I began unthreading, and I started setting my alarm in the middle of the night to do exercises around the campus. And I started drinking coffee instead of having breakfast. Then I felt really sleepy, and I got really irritable, and I couldn't concentrate. And then I started binging when eventually I did eat, but it was in a public hall, so everyone was looking at me, and I started hoarding food in my room, and then that got rats. And that was the first sort of real point where I was like, oh, maybe that term anorexic is something that I might have. And I spoke to a wonderful teacher that was also there with me. And she said, look, I have bulimia and I've been in therapy 3 times and I find this really challenging. Have you ever thought that you might be anorexic? And that was the first time someone asked me rather than told me that I had an eating disorder. But I didn't get help for a number of years after that because I never felt anorexic enough. I always thought it was to do with numbers on a scale rather than the impact that it has to that person. And I'll never forget, someone once told me, you can just as easily drown in a puddle as you can in a lake. Eating disorders aren't about numbers, they're about impact.
Wow. I'm struck by the fact that I'm going to guess that teacher you spoke to, you wouldn't have had a clue she'd had issues with bulimia, because it still feels like we don't just come out and talk about this stuff like it's normal and people have this to deal with in their lives sometimes.
Absolutely. And I loved the way that she talked about it in a very down-to-earth way. I'll never forget, a couple of years ago, I fell over and I sort of bonked my little finger, and it swelled up and it looked horrible. I'll never forget, my housemate went, mate, I'd get that checked out. That doesn't look right. And it was just a real moment then that I was like, we talk about that with physical health, but with mental health, no one kind of goes, yeah, no, you're not sleeping. You do seem a little bit irritable. You can't concentrate. Have you thought about getting it checked out? It annoys me that mental health is always a bit sensationalistic.
And there's always this sort of hesitancy to bring something up because you think, I might get it wrong. I might say something wrong, which, as you say, you wouldn't say about, hey, that looks wrong, mate. I don't know what's going on, but you should get it looked at,
Absolutely.
I know these 2 threads do intertwine as we go along your story, but put all that aside for a second and tell me about becoming a full-time stand-up comedian, because that's taken a brave leap into the unknown, isn't it?
Oh, it was. And I think many reviewers said it was a stupid idea. I think that the two threads do tie really nicely together, because I think comedy is brilliant because it transcends class and race and gender and background. I've never met anyone who doesn't like to laugh. And actually, one of the most isolating things that happened when I was going through the anorexia was that people stopped mucking about with me. They stopped playing pranks on me. They stopped telling me jokes because they didn't want to say the wrong thing. But that in itself was the most isolating thing. So when I became full-time in stand-up, I did that and I went to Edinburgh. And the first show that I did was all about the anorexia in order to try and normalize that conversation. But I think part of the lifestyle of actually being a stand-up comic. People think it's all glitz and glamour and awe, but actually it's just a lot of service stations at 3 a.m, a lot of loneliness, and not a lot of money.
Absolutely. How did you end up getting invited to do a TED Talk?
That was really lovely. So someone had seen my Edinburgh show and they just happened to be casting the TED Talks then. And it was a brilliant experience because I got to meet the guy that set up Movember. I got to meet up someone who later ran for some of the London Assembly mayoral elections. And I felt so out of my depth, but that was such a fun little experience. And I'm one of those people, I love TED Talks anyway. So that was a real sort of a rabbit in the headlights moment.
And that ultimately was the basis for the book that you sold bucket loads of, right? Weight Expectations.
Yeah, I was really chuffed that they approached me when I did the TED Talk and said, look, and there's always a silly joke that I make about it, but they did say, look, there's a gap in the market for the first book on male anorexia. And I pointed out it's not a very big gap, and they didn't laugh and it got really awkward. But we wrote this book, and I wanted to use humor again to kind of normalize that, because especially we know that up to 25% of people with anorexia are blokes, and 50% of people with binge eating disorder are blokes. And a great way of trying to engage those hard to reach groups is using humor. And because the book was about anorexia, I originally wanted to call it The Real Hunger Games, but I wasn't allowed that because apparently it infringes copyright.
Yeah. I mean, I totally get you. It's not unrelated, is it, to what you were saying about the isolation of people not, having a laugh with you, making fun of you, cracking jokes when you were at the worst with your anorexia. It's, why shouldn't we have a laugh when we're talking about this stuff? I mean, Susan Calman was on a while back. I was telling her how much I enjoyed her book about depression, which is really, really funny, but actually still very powerful. Why shouldn't comedy be part of it? Weight Expectations, the book's called. I'm going to play some music and then we'll chat some more. Really good to have you on, Dave. Dave Chawner is with me for lunch this afternoon. We'll carry on after Diana Ross. Got one of the chasers on the show after 1 o'clock from The Chase. Who doesn't love The Chase at tea time? The Dart Destroyer, Sean Wallace, the barrister. He's on after 1 o'clock, nearly 12:30 at the moment. Diana Ross, Chain Reaction. At the moment we are doing lunch with, it says here, number one best-selling author, award-winning stand-up presenter and mental health campaigner. That's what it says on davechawner.co.uk. On your own website, Dave. That's all right.
It should say pathological liar as well. That's what it should say.
No, I mean, look, it's all accurate, isn't it? You do all those things. And number one best-selling author's got a nice sound about it, hasn't it? Were you surprised at that?
I really was. I mean, it will show that people will buy any old tat. Because this is the weird thing about putting a book out into the world. There's with stand-up, there's a real immediate call and effect. You know if a joke hasn't landed or if it has. Whereas doing the book it's odd because there's no kind of end goal to it. Because when you write it, you kind of are writing for this unknown, faceless sort of audience. And then when it comes out, actually, the first day that it goes out is all, exciting, etc. But it just kind of pootles along, which is very unlike a lot of other media that everyone's used to, like social media or newspaper, radio, TV. So it was odd and very unexpected that it did have the reaction that it did.
What feels more exposed, if you like, personally? Doing a stand-up routine about anything, but in particular, I guess, about your own journey through mental health issues, or writing all that down and putting it out in a book?
I think the book is so much more vulnerable because there are things in there that I've never told my parents that are in there. And it's really difficult because especially like my publisher kept on saying, the editor kept on saying, oh yeah, can we have more of this? Can we go more into that? And they were brilliant. They weren't probing. But you realize, I think one of the things that I find difficult about the book, and the wonderful Susan Calman, I know finds this as well, of everything sounds very sanitized, very clean, very clear. Whereas actually the truth about like mental illnesses is really icky and difficult to describe. And actually a lot of the time it's very unconscious. So yeah, that felt a lot more raw.
You're pleased you did it? For yourself?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you're pleased that it helps other people, but are you pleased for yourself that you did it?
That's a really good question. Yeah, you know what? Yeah, I suppose it's been brilliant, and the copies that I've got at home really make a brilliant doorstop. So I think that is a bonus.
What about other people's response, feedback, reviews, all that?
That's something that I kind of. It's always their experience, and I think that's what's lovely. I think that mental health is always bigger than one person, and I'm always uncomfortable talking about my story. And the only way that someone years ago sort of said the best way to explain this is you're using your story as an example to help other people. And I do understand that there are people out there who feel very skeptical about the mental health movement. And I'm not doing this in order to get Twitter likes or, sort of subscribers on YouTube or anything like that. It genuinely is, my center master is always, what is the thing that I needed when I was 17? And that was what I wrote the book for, selfishly, was the Dave when he was 16, 17. This is the book that you need. And when you get that feedback that has helped other people, it's genuinely quite emotional, because you're like, whoa, I never thought that people would be reading it in Sweden or New Zealand, but it really makes you think.
Absolutely. Tell me about comedy for coping.
So excited about this. Well, that leads necessarily onto this. There are so many brilliant comics out there that are talking about mental health. For example, the brilliant Susan Cowman and Felicity Ward and Laura Lex, and even Paul Merton has talked about his experiences. And I think it's such an exciting time for comedy. And when I was going through therapy, I was doing the show about anorexia at the time, and I realized that actually there's a huge overlap in that Venn diagram, that comedy helps build your confidence. It helps with your communication. It helps with that connection with other people that we always talk about, loneliness, and it helps combat that while literally giving people a platform to stand up for themselves. So I wanted to use those tools in order to engage people that perhaps would say, oh no, mental health service, I don't feel like doing yoga in order to get better. That's a little bit too Waitrose shopping, hummus dipping, Prosecco drinking for me. And there's so many people out there that perhaps don't want to go into services, whereas comedy for coping is teaching stand-up in a completely different way, and hopefully changing the tone around mental health to give people hope and health, rather than all of these stories, negative stories that unfortunately will increasingly come out about how there's huge waiting lists, etc. So it's really to try and put a positive spin on a very negative problem.
And on the face of it, it's an online course to learn how to do stand-up comedy, right?
Yes, I realised I actually didn't answer that last question. In a nutshell, it is 6 1-hour lessons, and it teaches people using peer support, so you get to know people. And I've done this alongside academics at King's College London, the University of Kent and the University of Nottingham, that have actually put in the kind of technical stuff of like, oh, peer support is good in this way, shape or form. And it's all done through interactive workshops and games so that people get to know each other. Hopefully by the end of the 6 weeks, they've got a little stand-up set that you can go and do. Now, in normal COVID times, we'd hopefully do that live. But right at the moment, we're looking at doing this all remotely via Zoom. So anyone in the UK can do it.
Are you, because, we keep talking about, because they're important and they're interesting aspects of your life and your work. You're not bothered about being pigeonholed as like the mental health bloke in stand-up?
I would love to be pigeonholed as that. I genuinely would. And it's interesting because I have a terrible attention span. I'm basically just a taller child, and I'm not even that tall. But mental health is one of those few things that I honestly just don't get bored of talking about, because I think it has such an impact on so many different areas of your life. And I would 100 times prefer to do a gig talking about mental health rather than going to Ilfracombe to sort of talk about, willy jokes or something like that. Not that there's anything bad with that, but I really do enjoy talking about mental health, and I love comedy through that. And some of the opportunities that it's given me has been amazing, like being being awarded this grant from the British Academy so that we can go on and do this has been brilliant. So yeah, I kind of heavily lean into that. I would love to be the mental health comedian.
Let's play some more music and talk some more. It's really good to have you on. Dave Chawner with me for lunch this afternoon. That's nice, isn't it? Got the love. James Smith on BBC Radio Derby. My guest for lunch this afternoon here is the comedian Dave Chawner. Thanks for hanging on, Dave.
Thank you. I love that.
I'm just looking at all these various pieces of paper I've got about different things in your career. They're all fascinating. We talked about comedy for coping. So is that something you'd like to see rolled out more widely, this comedy for coping course?
Absolutely it is. And I'm not going to lie, I don't want to take all of the credit because it kind of came about because little story that when I was very ill, I was going around and I was actually doing a conference down in Brighton, and my now partner actually did her doctoral thesis in men with eating disorders, and she was presenting her research where I was the keynote speaker. We met, and next year we're going to get married, which is a lovely little kind of story. I mean, she doesn't know that we're going to get married yet, but it's going to happen. And I always joke that I'm not really a boyfriend, I'm more of a case study. But we talked so much about her thesis, and her thesis is all about emotional intelligence, which is basically, just trying to make sense of emotions and positive outlets for emotions. And that's exactly what the course does. So we both worked together on this in order to provide real world, down to earth ways that you can do this. Because I think one of the problems is that, the industry that has the highest suicide rate is the construction industry. Yet do you think that any builders or sparkies or plasterers are going on Facebook and seeing those memes with rainbows behind them and the footprints in the sand? Do you think that speaks to them? Absolutely not. Whereas I think comedy can engage a whole range of people.
This is really intriguing. Viv's just sent a message in, by the way, one of my listeners. He says, great conversation with Dave Chawner, enjoying it. He says, I won't say that he's brave or courageous. He's talking about an issue that's been an elephant in the room for millions, and he makes it everyday and normal, which makes people open up and talk about it more, which is worth more than any standing ovation at a comedy club.
That's so kind. That's really lovely. And I think I honestly do. This is why I never really like talking about stigma, because I think there's a lot of negativity out there, etc. And I think we can forget how incredibly quick and fast and amazingly we've moved on with the mental health conversation in the past 10 years. Like, the improvement has been brilliant. And the thing that makes me uncomfortable talking about stigma is that I feel we're bringing up a younger generation who are very open to talking about their mental health and very open to learn about it and understand about it. And I don't want to remind them that there was a time when people were embarrassed or felt. And I think that that's something that you've got to remember, is that, actually let's lead by example and just talk about it rather than talking about when we couldn't.
Just lead the conversation rather than suggest that there's any reason you wouldn't. I get that.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're working on another stand-up show at the moment, are you? I know you're concentrating on the course, the comedy for coping, but you're working on a new set. What's it called?
It's called Mental, and it's all about mental health rather than mental illness. And it's all based on the premise that 1 in 4 of us has mental illness, but you know what? 4 in 4 of us has mental health. And it's based on a little story. It's ages ago, but about 18 months ago, I was on 2 years ago now, I was on the sofa on BBC Breakfast, and the lovely producer called me up and said, I'm really excited to talk to you because I've never had any mental health. And I was like, what? And she said, I've never had
a dark proposition, yeah.
Yeah, she was like, none of my family, I don't know anyone that has any mental health. And I was like, are you a toaster? And it made me realize that, mental health and mental illness are a lot like ant and deck. They're two separate things, but we only ever distinguish between the two when there's a problem. So it's trying to engage with actual mental health and talk about the positive. And oh my goodness, isn't mental health brilliant? It doesn't always have to be about mental illness.
Do you touched on this talking about your other half. Do you distinguish between mental health and emotional well-being?
Very good question. And the honest answer is no. Day to day, I'm getting about, I'm, doing the shopping, etc. And it's little moments in life, little window moments that I think make you sort of stand, stop and stare. And I think the past 18 months with the pandemic has been a huge one for people like that. And I think that something that's always missed out of the dialogue with mental health is actually a lot of the time, other people can see how your mental well-being is much clearer than you can yourself. And I think that's something that really needs to be addressed, that actually sometimes people around you are a much better barometer of you than you yourself.
Are you mentally healthy right now? You in a good place?
Oh, very good. Well, I'm in a lovely hotel. I'd say I'm a 7 out of 10. Another hotel. 7 out of 10. I always say I love using the analogy of weather. And I'd say I'm sort of like today, I'm bright, few clouds, but nice and sunny, nice and warm.
That's not bad. That's worse than better than a lot of the alternatives, isn't it?
Yes.
Look forward to talking again sometime, because it's been so much fun, and look forward to when mental is a thing we can come and watch you doing. But go and look up the Comedy for Coping course if you're interested. Go and seek out the book, Weight Expectations. Thank you for coming on, Dave.
Thank you, Ian. What an absolute pleasure, mate.
Ian Skye.